Zibby's Bookshop. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to celebrate the paperback release of Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. Congratulations. She is here tonight in conversation with Janelle Brown, who's the author of You. So it'll be about a 30-minute conversation between the two of them. We can open it up to Q&A, and then plenty of books to buy and sign afterwards. So enjoy.
I guess I should introduce you.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out on a Monday night. Monday nights are usually when I burrow in my bed and don't want to get out. So thank you very much.
Most nights is when I burrow in my bed and don't want to get out. So always a delight to come west.
Yeah.
Everyone who's here probably knows who Jessica is. Jessica is the author of this wonderful book, Bright Young Women, and also two other books. Luckiest Girl Alive, and I just blanked on the name.
The Favorite Sister.
Favorite Sister. Thank you. I have it. I can see it on my bookshelf, but sometimes my memory is not the best. I loved this book so much. I listened to it in audio back when it first came out, and one is one of my favorite books of last year. And I just got to spend time with it again in print, which was really fun to listen to it and then read it. So, such a great book, and I'm super excited to be talking to you today about it. So. For those of you who haven't read it and don't know what it's about, it's basically loosely inspired by, based on the true story of Ted Bundy, but kind of a jumping off from the point of view of one of his victims and a friend of one of his victims. So maybe we should just start by talking about why you were drawn to Ted Bundy in the first place and how you landed with this story.
It was really because at the time I was working on an idea for my third novel, and it wasn't really going anywhere, and I wasn't feeling very inspired. And it was 2019, and there was a new docuseries on Netflix called the Ted Bundy Confession Tapes. And I was like, I think I know everything there is to know about this case. I know this guy primarily operated in the Pacific Northwest. But I'll watch it anyway because I'm a sucker for any and all docuseries about true crime. And I just found that there were parts of the story that I knew, but then parts that I didn't know, specifically that he had escaped prison twice. And on his second escape, he ended up in the panhandle of Florida. And actually, there was a month of terror that he reigned on the city of Tallahassee, and particularly on the Florida State University campus. He attacked a sorority house on a Saturday night. He maimed two sorority sisters, maimed four. Two of them died, two survived. And he was on the lam for another month and ultimately claimed the life of one more victim before they captured him. And I didn't know that part of the story. And there was something to me that was so chilling about him coming into a sorority house on a Saturday night, which to me must be one of the most joyful places you can be on a Saturday night. There were all the accounts that I read about it. The girls were getting ready to go out on dates and parties. And it really rattled me to think about this safe space and this place of joy for these young women being violated like that. And the other part of the docuseries that really got me angry, which I feel like being angry is always a good jumping off point to write something because it means I'm passionate about something. When he was ultimately found guilty of these crimes and sentenced to die by the electric chair, the judge famously said to him, "You are a bright young man, and I would have loved to see you practice in the courtroom in front of me. You would have made a great lawyer, but you went another way." And as soon as I heard those words, bright young man, my brain went, what about the bright young women? And the title was born there.
Were you in a sorority in college?
So my college didn't have sororities.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tiny liberal arts school in upstate New York. So I was a little bit intimidated by the challenge of trying to capture sorority life accurately. But what I did understand is when I was a college senior, I lived in a house with 8 other girls. And I knew what Saturday nights were like at Gray House. That was the name of our senior house. And I just tried to capture what I remembered those nights being like, all the promise and young love and the things that you're so excited for. And the idea that in that moment of having so much excitement about your future, that it could be taken from you by a man who would then ultimately go on to be remembered, and your name and kind of your life and what your ambitions were for yourself would be forgotten.
Right. What was this like this must have been an extremely intense, research intense book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how and what it required?
Yeah. It, in some ways I thought, I mean, we're always trying to like game the system, right? And it's like, how can we make writing easier? Because it's really hard and really intimidating. I thought I thought that the research and kind of having certain dates in mind of like, this is when, you know, the attack happened. This is when he was captured. Okay, so I have to kind of fill the 4 weeks between when the attack happened and when he was captured. And I can come up with some interpersonal dynamics that will be interesting in that space. I thought that it would provide a sort of scaffolding that would make my job easier, but of course it didn't. And it actually felt almost more daunting in some ways, that I was trying to fit everything and trying to hit these like various coordinates. And ultimately it was my editor saying like, this is fiction in the end. So you should feel free to you're taking kind of the essence of what happened here and the crimes, and how these young women were treated by the authorities and in the media versus the treatment he received. So like, that's the kind of DNA that you're taking from this, but you should free yourself up to tell the story that you need to tell.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I actually just finished working. The book that I just finished is also based on a famous true crime, someone who killed someone, a lot of people. So I was very interested in how and where you decided to jump off from what was real and write fictionalized things. So how did you decide, like, how did you decide what you needed to keep and where you could take liberties and go fictionalize it?
Well, actually, with the character of Ruth, who is one of the victims in the Seattle area, all I knew about...
And she's real.
She's not really, because she's based on one of the real life victims, but all I knew about this victim was the day she died, and that the location that she was at when she had this encounter to him that ultimately led to her going missing. And he never confessed to the crime. They know he did it, but he never confessed. They never found her remains. That was all I knew. I just knew that she ended up at the beach on this day. And the thing that drew me into kind of crafting a story around this woman and who she was in the 6 months leading up to this, you know, her final day and her final hours on earth, what drew me in was this was a very mysterious disappearance. She went to Lake Sammamish Beach, which is outside Seattle, Washington, on the hottest day on record of the summer in 1974. And I think they estimated there were around 30,000 people on the beach that day. And so everyone was elbow to elbow on the sand. I did actually go to Lake Sammamish. I mean, talk about the research process. Like, I did go on a research trip to Lake Sammamish as well, as to Florida State University campus. But when I got there for myself, the beach is quite small. And then there's a lawn area. So this idea that like anyone who got a spot on the beach, like you were literally elbow to elbow with your neighbor. So the young woman, the real victim, was tanning, and a man came up to her with a cast on his arm and said he needed her help. And so there were eyewitnesses on either side. There was a group of high school girls and there was a young mother with her kids. And they both, in their statements to the police, said that this young woman was initially very irritated that this man came up and asked for her help because she was just trying to have a relaxing Sunday at the beach, laying out. She didn't quite understand why he needed her help. He had a broken arm. He needed help loading something into the car. She was like, I'm a small woman. Like, how am I supposed to help you? But he ultimately convinced her to go off with him and to help him. And she was never seen alive again. Mm-hmm. And so it just blew my mind that like, how could again, kind of this idea of like a Saturday night in your safe space at your house with all your best friends and everyone's so excited about it. Like, how could a place where wonderful memories were created also be the location of where the worst memories of your life are created. It was kind of that idea of like how on this gorgeous day in the summer, this girl just tried to have a relaxing Sunday. Did he get her away? And I just started thinking about how could I craft a character who felt she couldn't say no to this man, who felt that she had to help him. And I came up with her story, which was completely fictionalized, and which my editor pointed out, you completely fictionalized Ruth's stories. And it actually was the one that gave me no problem. It was always Pamela's that I was struggling with. And it was because I almost had too much information about what had happened to her. And I think it was like messing with my sense of like flow in the story and my own creativity.
And she was also fictionalized. Pam's an invented character.
She's a bit of an amalgam between a couple of the different sorority sisters. Of course, there was a lot more written about these young women. I had their audio transcripts from all of their police interviews. I mean, the audio was awful, but like I was like literally I would have to sit in the most quiet place and just have it turned all the way up, and I could still only barely pick up pieces here and there. But from what I did gather, the police were just trying to figure out what the hell happened. They didn't know who had committed this attack on the sorority, and they were just trying to figure out, like, was there anyone who had a vendetta against the 4 girls who were attacked? Like, was anyone targeted? And of course, eventually they found out no one in particular was targeted. He just opened doors and went for whoever was in the room. They didn't know that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so, yes, so I had a lot of information about who the victims were. And about who the surviving sorority sisters were. So I took pieces from them, and I was just really taken with all of them, really. Their poise, their grit, they really got through this together by supporting one another. They didn't have a whole lot of support from the community, and I really admired their resilience.
Are you the kind of author that needs to find something of yourself in each of your characters?
Yes,
okay, so
it's
what
a problem?
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Where did you find yourselves in Pam and in Ruth?
Yeah, I think in Pamela, it was a little bit, there's something about her that she always knows that there's kind of something about herself that she's not willing to confront, and she just wants a kind of keep a safe distance from it. And I think that was something that I was a little bit, I could relate to, and that maybe I was kind of going through at the time I was working on this novel, was just kind of confronting head on things from when I was younger that weren't the most obvious traumas or weren't the most obvious thing, like concrete memories, but things that I knew were impacting my life as an adult, that I had to look straight in the eye in order to kind of shift behavior and things that I wasn't proud of, and that I wanted to have growth in my life. And so I love this idea of something horrible happening to someone, and from that horrible experience, they actually grow as a person and they thrive as a person. And there is research that shows that some people's response to trauma is to actually thrive from it, to take a piece of it, to find purpose in your life from it. And I loved the idea that Pamela was someone who got the chance to do that because Ruth didn't.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So then where did you locate yourself within Ruth?
Oh, well, with Ruth, her passion in life is cooking, and that's also a passion of mine. So it was, so it was actually, and the fact that she, that it was something that she felt like the people around her didn't always enjoy the food she made. Oddly enough, I've always had that experience in life. Like I would cook for people, and they would be like, I don't really like to cook with a lot of meat. So I feel like I end up cooking for people and they're like, where's the protein? I'm hungry. And I'm like, I just made you the most delicious pasta. Like just have a second serving. You don't need meat, So I just like the idea of she was someone who wasn't appreciated for like the kind of taste that she had and the kind of expertise that she was bringing. I also loved that she was someone who she had kind of like a martyred sort of experience. Like her mother was kind of that martyr type.
Narcissistic martyr, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and that she dealt with it with a sort of humor, which I could also relate to. And then, of course, like ultimately, she finds herself drawn to a woman who is studying to become a therapist, and I'm obsessed with my therapist. And so I was able to actually interview my therapist and be like, what are things that this woman would like draw out of her, you know? And so I liked the idea that she had someone who was like challenging her to like look inward and like gain these sorts of insights.
I loved Tina. I thought she was such a great character.
Yeah.
Why did you not write her point of view? I was curious about that.
Initially I had 3 point of views, and my editor was like, it's too many. Like, and I couldn't find a way to kind of make them all connect in a way where you weren't like, wait, whose point of view are we in again? And I haven't been with her for a while, so I don't know that I necessarily care about her anymore. At least my editor was like, it's been so long that I've been away from this person and their point of view that I don't quite care about them anymore. So it might help you to kind of like edit things down. Right. So I wanted to kind of do all 3, but I wasn't able to execute it.
Right.
Like it was in my mind, but I couldn't execute it. Yeah.
I do remember from social media, you like going through a whole process with this book, and it seeming like it was a really hard book for you to write. Was that part of what was hard about it, or what were the challenges that you went through with this?
I mean, that was definitely one of them. I think everything I've worked on since my first novel, Luckiest Girl Alive, has been extremely challenging. I think I had such a unicorn experience with Luckiest Girl Alive that I assumed every project I worked on after that would come to me kind of as fully formed as that project did.
Right.
And it just has not. And so my process, and I would love for this not to be my process, but I've now been at this for over 10 years, and I think I need to just accept that it is what it is. But I just write many, many, many drafts of many things, whether it's a script, whether it's a novel, and I turn it in, and I just take the feedback that's given to me, like, and I gird my loins because I know there's going to be feedback, and I'm going to hear like it's not working, but I need to hear from someone else why it's not working. And then I go back in and I try and I do my best to just kind of like surgically insert things or shift things. And then what ends up happening is I just discover something different about the character, different about the story. And inevitably I'm like, I just need to throw this out and start all over again because I know more now and I know better. And then I'll write another pass, and then I turn it in, and the process just like repeats itself many, many times.
That is
it's horrible. It's horrible.
But also kind of exciting that you can have this really collaborative relationship with your editor.
Yeah.
Not everyone has that. Like I think very few people have that, to be able to like turn something in early and often, and to have an editor that help you see the gems, as opposed to being like, oh, this isn't working. And,
Thank you, Mary Sue Ritchie. We love you.
Hopefully she's watching this. No, that's amazing. One of the things I was kind of wondering about this book was whether it took a big emotional toll on you to be spending so much time with a serial killer in your head. Because I know people who've written serial killer books before who have it took them to some very dark places.
Yeah.
And
I feel like there's something wrong with me that I get this question and the answer is no. Like it didn't bother me. It was just like, just another Tuesday. Yeah. I just read something today, actually, an interview with Brie Larson, something she said about after she did Room, that like she hasn't been able to do anything dark since then because it took her to such a dark place. And I was just like, I know that happens to people. I just come from a place where like I'm comfortable with the darkness, you know? And actually to kind of harken back, we were talking earlier about Taffy, it's Brodesser Akner, right? She has a new book out, Long Island Compromise, and she wrote this piece for the New York Times Magazine about trauma and how you kind of like survive what you've already survived, which is like in essence the kind of theme of this book. Like, how do you survive what you've already survived? But she talks about her neighbor who, when she was a teenager, he was kidnapped and he ended up being returned alive. But he ended up being one of those people who continued to thrive. Like, even though this horrible, frightening, terrorizing thing happened to him, he went on to still have a very nice life and had meaningful connections with people, did meaningful work, and had a good outlook on life. And she talks about when she went to interview him for this piece that she noticed that when he talked about the kidnapping, he almost had like a small smile on his face when he was talking about it. And she realized that, and she had also experienced a trauma, which she had written into her first novel, Fleischman's in Trouble, which honestly, when I read that part of it, I had wondered, I wonder if that's real, because it was just articulated in such a way where I was like, that it just felt
you felt
like
like it had come from a real place.
Completely.
Yeah.
And that, you know, it was made into a TV show and she was very involved in the TV show. And that when that scene was filmed, she was thinking about it and wondering like if she had that same kind of expression of being relaxed on her face. And she was like, and I think I probably did, because I think the thing about trauma is that it's only when we're talking about it or like reliving it or remembering it that we can like kind of drop the mask and the facade of everything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just actually talking about the thing that like really was formative to you, you know, and you don't have to pretend like everything is okay. You're talking about this really dark and deep and painful thing. And I have that, you know, I've experienced a trauma in my life. And so I just feel like sometimes when I'm dealing in these dark matters that I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm down where in the muck where I'm most comfortable. Like, I don't know what it says about me, but I'm at the point in my life where I'm just kind of embracing it.
Well, I mean, again, everyone processes trauma in their own ways. And if this is your way of processing is by writing about it, and you've written about it now in 3 different books, like trauma.
I don't know that I'll
plus
ever not write
exactly.
about it. Yeah.
Right. It's one of your things. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's what I like to watch. It's like what I like to read. And I have noticed that when I put on a true crime show, Julie, thank you very much for the recommendation for the double kidnapping.
What is this?
Yeah. This is the new HBO Max documentary about the double kidnapping of the cousins.
Ooh.
It just came out. I know. Yeah.
Ooh.
And I put it on in bed. My husband's like, oh God, here we go. Like, can we just have something nice and funny and normal on in the background before we go to bed? And I'm like, this relaxes me. Like, I feel my eyelids get heavy. And I also, my personal theory is that I think in writing books like this or consuming books like this or shows like this, there's always this promise that like this story that you're watching that is or reading that is dark, it has already been processed by someone else and it's coming to you packaged as a complete story. So whether it's solved or not, there's some sort of resolution.
Yeah.
And I think the promise of that resolution is like deeply soothing to me. And that's why I get that like very like, oh, like it's like a sleeping pill to me. Like I just know that like this is all, someone is going to make this senseless thing make sense for me.
Right.
And that is very comforting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about the like contrast between the books that you write and how dark they are, rape and murder and all kinds of fun, dark things. And then like your Instagram, your feed, which is like puppies and babies and, oh, look at this beautiful pasta I'm making. And like,
me.
yeah, it's like it's like the person, if I was just to like excise the Jessica from like Instagram stories and be like, what kind of books do you think this woman writes?
Yeah,
so they'd be like, I don't know, rom-coms.
Yeah.
No.
I guess I present rom-com.
You present rom-com, but you write dark, twisted. Yeah.
Only a rom-com where, it ends up being a kill for insurance policy.
Right. Exactly. Or reality TV, like the reality television show that you've ended in a murder, right? Like a second. Okay, so let me look at my questions because I had a whole emotional arch, like through line of these questions. Okay, so beyond trauma, I'm curious what you see as the through line of the 3 books that you've written so far. Like how are they similar to you, and how, like, in what way was this a departure from your previous books?
This was a huge departure from my previous books. I mean, for so many reasons. A big one was it was the first time I wasn't writing primarily in a contemporary setting.
Right.
So having to kind of capture what life would have been like for a 21-year-old young woman in 1978 and a 25-year-old young woman in 1974, like it was a little intimidating to me. I was like, I don't want to get this wrong. Because you know how sometimes sometimes I'll read books by men that are writing women and you're like, oh, no. So I was like, I didn't want anyone reading this and be like, this author doesn't know what this writer doesn't know what they're talking about. It's like my biggest pet peeve. So I wanted it to be believable. I wanted it to feel real. And there were definitely a number of times where I was like, I don't know if I can do this, and so I am proud of myself that I stuck with it and I, kind of challenged myself in that way. I do think it's a departure also with my first two books, I was always writing the characters at the age that I was when I was writing the book and kind of capturing that exact sensibility I felt at 29, 34. This was like, it was also a lot for me to remember, like, what was it like being 20, 21 years old? Like, that's a long time ago now. Like, I don't know. And I feel like a completely different person. And then also I was trying to capture the point of view of this 21-year-old girl all grown up in her 60s now, so it was like I was tackling ages that I either have not been or have not been for a long, long time. So yeah, I do feel more, I do think I'll probably, well, I already know because I'm working on my fourth book, I will probably go back to continue with the contemporary setting, kind of following where I'm at in my life and like certain kind of realizations that I'm having at these different ages. I do kind of like capturing those as like flashpoints in my novels, but I wanted to just like shake it up with this one.
Right. Yeah. Do something different.
Yeah.
And what about thematically? Like, how do you see these books all being tied together? Like, what? Obviously, murder.
Murder.
But specifically, like, what do you think are the things that you're drawn to?
I will say, between Bright Young Women and Luckiest Girl Alive, I don't know if this is in the Favorite Sister so much, but something I did recognize that I was doing in Bright Young Women that consciously I knew I was doing with Luckiest Girl Alive, but didn't realize until after finishing this book that I was also doing in Bright Young Women, is this idea that it drives me crazy. It gets under my skin. It keeps me up at night if I feel we've gotten the narrative wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Luckiest Girl Alive, what was driving that novel was based on my own trauma, that like there was a version of that narrative of what had happened to me that everyone believed. And I knew it wasn't true. And so I like desperately needed to like correct the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly with Bright Young Women, once I started digging and doing research and kind of realized that I had it wrong myself, that
Mm-hmm.
I thought I knew this case. I thought I knew everything there was to know about Ted Bundy. I thought that he was charismatic and smart and good looking and charming. And like, that's how he was able to kind of operate for all of these years, like, and not be caught, and how he lured women away because they were charmed by him. Like, once I started digging and realized that was absolutely not true, that there are so many instances of women who he approached who ultimately didn't go with him, but who reported to the authorities after the fact, after he was caught, like, I had a bad feeling about this guy. And even the night of the attack on the sorority house, he started out at a local bar nightclub that was right next door to the sorority house. And one of the sorority sisters who was there was approached by him and asked to dance. And she famously said to one of her friends as she stood up to dance with him, "Oh God, I think I'm about to dance with a con man." And like, she told police there was a vacancy to his eyes. He had black eyes. He scared me. I could smell alcohol off him. I just had a bad feeling, but I danced with him nonetheless. Because as
like,
women,
how did he do that?
as women,
so creepy.
You don't say no. You feel uncomfortable saying no. Like, I still feel uncomfortable saying no, and it's 2024. So that was also something I tried to keep in mind, was like, if it feels hard in 2024 and we have a dialogue about that, and we're like trying to correct these patterns and do better for our daughters and let them know, like, you should have a voice, you should trust your gut, and don't be afraid to be a bitch, essentially. No one was saying that in 1975,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
1974,
Right.
and all throughout then. So that bothered me, that there was this narrative out there that these women were kind of fooled by him. And I was like, no. They were never fooled. It was his MO was that he feigned injury. He either was on crutches or wore a cast, and he approached women and asked them for help. He didn't charm them or seduce them or anything. He asked them for help. It's a very different thing.
Right.
And so once I realized that, I got really mad, and I was like, I need to correct this narrative. And I realized like that's kind of what I was doing with Luckiest Girl Alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Channeling that anger.
Yeah.
I know we're going to go ask questions in a minute, but before we do, I wanted to ask you a little bit about I know you're adapting this.
Yeah. Well, not quite yet. I mean, I am with my same producers from Luckiest Girl Alive, and we would like to see this as a limited series. So I'm working on a pitch for that. But we haven't gone out with it yet. Obviously, the writer's strike has impacted things just slightly. Right. So we're trying to be strategic about how we do that. And I'm also working on the next book, and I have a script I'm working on for Sony called My Mother-in-Law Was Poisoning Me, and then I found out why. Just other light fare.
Fun amuse-bouche.
Exactly.
Well, let's open it up for questions. Anyone?
I always wondered, at the very end, I don't remember what they planted to find
The ferns.
The ferns.
Yeah.
Is that real? And
so it's a real department at the University of Tennessee. What Brandy is talking about is there is research that there's a department of forensic anthropology at University of Tennessee, and there was a fascinating Wired article about them. I encourage everyone to read it. And they basically have what's called a body farm on the campus, where they study how the decomposition of a dead body impacts the soil and the surrounding vegetation. And that they have found that like it can cause the color of the plants to change as they grow. And so I took that, and I don't know that they are quite at the point where they could see those changes in soil and vegetation so many decades after the fact. So that's thankfully where I'm writing fiction and I can take certain liberties here. But it is a real department. And so that was based on something like a nugget of truth. Yeah. Yeah.
when you're working with multiple narrators and timelines, do you write it the way we read it, or do you write like a timeline through and then kind of weave things together?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I tend to initially try and write it as you read it. And of course, with all the tinkering that happened in the years it took me to write this book, I did break up some of Ruth's story, and especially more towards the end, and try and make sure that what was going on in Pamela's story was just a little bit keeping Ruth centered a bit. Like you have her mother showing up, and so it felt like we were still building a sense of urgency of what happened to Ruth and keeping that question alive in Pamela's story. But that was, now I'm remembering, part of the process that almost drove me over the edge. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad that's over.
Until the next book.
Yeah, exactly.
Pamela's retelling of the night of the assault was disregarded again and again and again by men in power.
Yeah.
Over the investigation and trials. I don't know if that was true, but I do know it would have made me angry too.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you included it in the book. Was it true?
So a little bit. The main thing was that she did initially have this, the eyewitness did initially have this flash thought of like, oh, I think this is somebody we know. She actually thought it was their, I forget what they called them back then. It was like their version of a handyman. But it was usually like someone from their sweetheart fraternity who would like come over if there was like a plumbing issue or something like that. They would help them out. And it is at the trial that they have Ted Bundy and that guy, that college student, stand shoulder to shoulder because they did have a similar build. They were both on the smaller side, had the same coloring, that sort of thing. But then she quickly realized like, oh, actually, I don't know who that is. And, you know, I think we can look back now and realize like in moments like that, like our brains will step in to do anything to like normalize what we're seeing, you know, like why would she be seeing a man leaving the sorority house at 3 a.m.? Oh, it must be our handyman. He must have come over, you know, like your brains are like jumping through all these hoops to like make sense of what you saw. But what is true and what was in the book is that like they didn't have any hard evidence to tie Ted Bundy to the murders at the sorority house. They only had her eyewitness testimony. And in a capital murder case, that's circumstantial evidence. So there was so much on the shoulders of this young woman. And there was a lot that the defense had that they could poke holes in because they were like, we have her initial statement where she thought it was someone else. And this is literally all you guys have tying him to the case. So that part of it was true. Like it was definitely one of those things where memory is not always reliable. So from there, and there were so many things that like women weren't believed about in this case that I think I just like also wanted that to be present in the novel. And that felt like a good opportunity to like have the sense of that there, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes,
Oh, sorry.
Mike. It's all right.
I feel like with a case like this, we've seen so many like adaptations where it gets very gratuitous and like sensationalized. Was it hard to balance being accurate with like what actually happened without going too far to be like, oh, this is like maybe too much information?
Yeah. Yes. And it's something I'm even more cognizant about as I'm working on the pitch for the TV show. It's like, what are we showing? How much are we showing? And like the rule that I came up with, you know, if knock on wood, like this moves forward, is that we won't ever see violence being done. We'll only see the effects of violence in the aftermath, because that's like so much more what I'm interested in anyway, is like when something like this happens that just shatters your world, like what does the next day look like? Like, do you sleep through the night? When are you even able to eat a full meal again? Like how do you trust again? How do you like, how are you ever alone again and feel safe again? You know, these are the questions that I'm like the most interested in, because I'm always like, there was a moment in my life where I was like, how do you do this? And so I'm always looking to other people to see how they survived this. So yeah, it's constantly changing. It's constantly on my mind of like, how do you do this, but not be gratuitous about it? And I think just being thoughtful about it and worrying about it is, at least I tell myself, like, that's a good thing that I would say not every writer who is writing violence out there is necessarily asking those questions.
I wish more of them would.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Someone over there had a question. Yes.
I was wondering, because Lucky's Girl Alive was made into a movie, and you said you're pitching this one as a TV series. What do you see as like the benefits and pitfalls of those two forms, especially when you're thinking of adapting it from a book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never successfully gone through the process of adapting something into a TV show. So this is based on like very nascent knowledge, but to me, it feels very freeing to have a lot more real estate. Even writing the movie version of Luckiest Girl Alive, like it was heartbreaking, like certain things that you had to lose, and kind of even stuff that we filmed, but like ultimately ended up on the cutting room floor, especially stuff with the teacher character, Mr. Larson. So I'm hopeful that just the fact that we have more minutes of runtime means that I don't have to kill as many darlings. But I'm sure like that's all easier said than done. And if I am lucky enough to get to that point in things, there's no version of making something or creating something where you don't ultimately have to kill your darlings. Like I think it's just a necessary part of the process. Were you raising your hand? Oh no, okay, sorry. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Do you mentioned working on multiple projects and just the kind of your process of editing. Do you like to give yourself space in between projects of like, I'm just not working on anything right now, or do you always have that next idea kind of queued up?
I would like to give myself space. I just made the mistake of saying yes to one too many things several years ago now, and things are just ongoing. My goal is, is to get through the next couple of things I have and then not say yes to anything else but the next book I'm working on for a very long time. Like, I think it's just hard when something comes to you and you love the project and you love the people involved in it. It all seems like such a good idea and it seems like it'll be a nice break from novel writing. But ultimately, things in development can just kind of like limp along for years and years and years. And you can find yourself doing a lot of polishes and rewriting, and it kind of doesn't seem to ever end, is what I've learned.
Do you silo where you're like you only work on one thing at a particular time, or do you
so I can only
bounce around in a day?
No, not in a day. If I could bounce around in a day, I think I would have it made. Like I can only work on one thing at a time. So then what ends up happening, which is a horrible feeling for me, a certified people pleaser, is like I'm working on this one thing, but then I'm getting emails from the people on this other thing, like, where are you at on this? And I'm like, I'm not even going to be able to turn to that for like another couple of months. And I know that's not what you want to hear. And I don't like telling people what they don't want to hear. I'm trying to be better about that. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have plenty of books up front to buy, and then we can meet you guys up there. We can do some signing.
Okay, great.
Should we turn this?
Sharpie, please. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Are you still hot right?
Yes.
We can talk shit.
We can talk shit in like 2 seconds. Thank you very much. Perfect. Sorry. Thank you.